Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for youth sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics setting up the conference championships. We'll, of course, start with the Yates, make our way through to all three of the other leagues, and, of course, talk so much more. And obviously, you see who's on the screen with us, and I'll give Tom the honor to introduce him. But first, Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I could not be doing any better, my man. We've got an esteemed guest joining us here. He is a two-time Yates Cup champion. He is a Vanier Cup champion with the Queen's Golden Gales. And as a coach, a Yates Cup champion with the Laurier Golden Hawks, who are both playing. He is the head coach of your Guelph Gryphons. Coach Mark Surya joins the program. Coach, how you doing this afternoon, this evening?
Yeah, excited to talk ball. Thanks for having me, guys. I think it's an exciting time to be a youth sports football fan and want to jump on and talk about two teams I know pretty well, and really proud of football in general at this level. So excited to talk about everything youth sports football tonight.
And Coach, we were mentioning a bit beforehand, your Guelph Gryphons, my Guelph Gryphons, everybody's Guelph Gryphons. It was such an up and down year that we're going to have you back on when we do our end of season breakdown specifically about your team. And you had some great matchups with these two clubs, but you highlighted one of the fascinating things with this matchup specifically, Laurier and Queens. You can look at the matchup of Coach Falls versus Queens, the last time Queens raised that glorious trophy we all vie for, which of course was a team you were a part of, Tom's favorite football game of all time, going back now, not to date you, Coach, 16 years. But can you just, if for only my dear, dear friend Tom's sake right now, and of course all the people listening, just take us back to '09 with that glorious run.
Yeah. I think '09 was a special year for myself, being a part of that Queens team. We ended up winning the national championship, but it was the first time I think we beat Western in the regular season in a long time in '09. So most people don't remember, but we won. I think there was 37 seconds left. And, Danny Brannigan threw a boundary side hook. He broke one tackle. Blaze Morrison scored the game-winning touchdown, which then allowed us to host the Yates in '09. And Coach Falls had a torn ACL at the time, and legendary things. Things that as time goes on, you forget how special it was. But he played the whole game on a torn ACL. Only had to be removed from the game because he had to roll to his left on the bad knee, and still almost got it down to the 1 yard line. So one of the favorite memories of mine is just the back and forth nature. I think there was a ton of offense played that day, and I would have never thought in '09 that I'd go and work with Coach Falls at a later date to kind of start my football career. And so I owe a lot to that guy. And obviously my career at Queens kind of got me started. So special moment in time and special moment for me and my family. And can't wait to see these two go at it on Saturday.
And of course, the game that has the greatest final call of any game by the legendary Tim McAuliffe. Nobody lost on this day. We just ran out of time. Something to that effect. Tom, I'm certain you want to talk to Coach about that game a little bit as well.
Oh, it's easily one of the greatest football games that you've seen, period, with not just the offense that's there, but with the big hits and some of the names that you had. Obviously, yourself and Coach Falls. But then you look at, O.C. Ukwoma. You look at all of these incredible players, Shamari Williams that's out there. Like, this is a stacked defense and a stacked team in both sides. And it really felt like when you're watching this, obviously you had arguably the greatest run for a national championship, because you go through Western, you go through Laval, and you go through Calgary. Like that's a wagon of a schedule there to end that off. But it really felt like whoever came out of that Yates Cup that year was going to go for at bare minimum, was going to make it to the Vanier, if not win it.
Yeah, I think I always look at it fondly as the golden age of quarterbacking before kind of what's happened in the last decade. But, Coach Falls was he ended up leading all time in passing yards that year. Danny Brannigan had it for about 3 minutes before Coach Falls broke it. But most people forget Justin Dunk at the time was also a highly accomplished passer. So you look across the league, and offense was at an all-time high. It was exciting football. It was also a time when, as you mentioned, Tim McAuliffe from the score really highlighted how great the talent was. And I remember, the fans at Queens stormed the field multiple times that year. And so to see the passion and to see how much it really meant to the campus that was awesome. And like you mentioned, the stars that were in that game that went on to go and have great careers, you could spend all night here talking about it. Similar to actually the game we're going to cover here, where I think there's going to be a few people in this game who end up having a long CFL career. So it's kind of, if you looked at both teams in 09, very veteran quarterbacks, just like the matchup we're about to see, a really veteran receiving core on both sides, which, we're about to see here. So there's a lot of similarities between the two games, and really good coaching staffs on both sides. It was exciting to be a part of, but more than anything, it was just great to feel the energy on campus that year with a great football team.
Well, in addition to having you back on to talk about your Guelph Gryphons, we might just have to put together a whole, I know 16 years is a bit of an odd number to do an anniversary type deal, but I think we might just have to make it happen, because no doubt we could go hours on end talking about that game. But you set up the matchup that we have here beautifully, and as well, just for folks listening, Coach Surya is joining us as well to talk about the other conference games, championship games as well. So again, folks, you're in for such an incredible episode here. But we have the matchup in the Yates Cup, Queens heading to Laurier, a rematch from September 5th, where Laurier came out victorious 47-32. Tom, you were in the house for that matchup. Let me throw it to you first before we get coaches' sort of thoughts on scouting and playing these two teams. What are your memories from being on the field again in seeing these two teams go head-to-head, a Friday night matchup, the explosive offenses, these hard-nosed defenses? What are your memories, Tom, being there in the house at Richardson Stadium?
Honestly, I felt like that was the game that Laurier's run game really came alive. I mean, Quentin Scott finished with 115 on the ground, Tayshaun Jackson with 73, and then obviously that huge punt return touchdown that he had. I felt like the compliment that Laurier brought to that, and the way that that offensive line played against a very good front seven that Queens had, really allowed them to get into this game. Now, Alex Freakin, 31 for 50 passing attempts against this team. He finishes with almost 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception himself, but that's a lot to put on the arm of this young man. Jared Kasari held to just 74 yards. I think if they're going to win this game, they're going to have to try to establish that run a little bit more, although Kasari, while coming out of that Windsor game last week, was fine. He looked pretty banged up. He had to go into the locker room for a little while as well before coming back out. So we'll see how much they really lean on him. But at the end of the day, this game is going to have to come down to Alex Freakin, how well he can throw that ball against a very good Laurier defense.
And Coach, you obviously are coming off of playing these Golden Hawks, a few weeks off of playing Queens. Laurier's offensive coordinator, my former offensive coordinator at Guelph, and Coach Todd Stones Galloway, as we know him here, used to, in our breakdowns, give us what he'd call the quick and dirty, as far as just the really simple analysis of these teams. Obviously, we could get you going for hours breaking these two clubs down, but when you look at this matchup, when you look at these two teams individually, what are the key aspects that make these teams great? What are the two things that out of the 11, what are the things that out of the 11 clubs we have in the OUA leave these two schools as the two remaining in the OUA?
Yeah, I think it really is difference in styles. And so I think in boxing, they say styles make the matchup. This one's a great one because of the way that both teams play. So if we start with Laurier, I think one of the things you can see about them, there's multiple ways to win on offense. So they've had games where they can run the ball. Our first game, they were able to run the ball when they needed to, kind of bleed out the clock. They got great running backs back there. They got a great offensive line. And 41, Sebastian Parasolis is the one that makes it all go. And so when you look at Laurier on offense, they have multiple ways to win. I think Rod Hughes was a great deep ball threat. You've seen it all year. With the injury to Ethan Jordan, it looks like, those high percentage quick passes in the RPO game, they've had to change their style a little bit. Laomi's such a dominant player across, special teams and offense, but they're really going to need another person to step up in Ethan's place to take a part of that RPO intermediate pass game. But what I like with the Laurier offense is they have multiple ways to win, whether it's running, throwing, and even, Cal Withers, great mobile quarterback. A lot of his off-schedule plays turned into positive plays against us on Saturday. And so they have multiple ways to win on offense. And then on defense, a really underrated storyline is Josh Connors, I think, got hurt halfway through the year. So he played against us in the first game. And if you looked at our game last week, they had an injury at the boundary half. And so they were able to move Jahari to the boundary half and actually play, 24 right behind him. But in our first game, they actually had Connors playing the will and Jesse Wilkins playing the Sam. And so it's one of those teams where they have so much flexibility in the back end, and both teams are going to play the run with, a lighter box, you could say it. So while Sebastian will add to the box, I think on defense, both teams will play it with all-star caliber linebackers in Gorsuch or Pace. And so the thing to look at is, how do they use Connors? I know he's coming off an injury. How do they use him in the game? And if Jesse can play the Sam number 2, and if Connors can play the Will, that's, I think, their best 12 on the field. And then on the Queens side, they're going to have to run the ball. Everything goes through Kazari. I think Alex Freakin's taken a huge step forward, especially you see throughout the years. He's healthy. He's not taking the unnecessary shots, but he's also willing to check it down to the backs if it's not there. High percentage passer, really good with his legs. That's the jump they've taken. But I think in order for them, I think Tom, you alluded to it, the run game is where they start. And with those 3 fullbacks or tight ends, however you want to call them, it really is a stylistic matchup where can Laurier play the run game with their regular personnel? And if Queens can establish the run and play some play action, I think that's their key to victory. Whereas I think Laurier has a few more opportunities to gain yardage multiple ways.
Well, and Tom, obviously we saw in that game in Kingston 2 weeks ago against your Marauders in the opening week of the playoffs, how effectively Queens was able to use their screen games, their RPO games off establishing the runs. We saw that in Ron Joyce. We'd seen just how they, as coach said, build off of that run game that we know is so effective. And I do want to get coach's thought on this, having faced Laurier early in the season, then facing them in the playoffs. But we've talked about a few times throughout the year, Tom, the sort of ascension of Cal Wither and just his comfortability within this system of Coach Galloway's, and sort of letting him kind of unleash a little bit more. It seems like every week we're seeing him take on a little bit more. Coach is alluding to having that run game established first and foremost. But as we know so well with 44 stand there in the middle for Queens, that's a tough proposition. When you look at Laurier, Tom, offensively this week, is it still going to be that aspect of letting Cal hold the reins, or are you in a line with Coach's speculation that it's going to start on the ground with Scott, with Tayshaun, and then being able to build outwards, especially if EJ is still out, which, again, from what we saw the last couple of weeks, maybe, and I'm always the last to know anything, seems like perhaps what the writing on the wall is from what we saw the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's really difficult to look at that because you see the production that Cal has had. I mean, in the regular season alone, he averaged 309 passing yards a game, finished with 26 touchdowns and just 4 interceptions. Now, it makes your life a whole lot easier when you can throw the ball to a guy like EJ on a crossing route and he takes it 60, 70, 80 yards to the house. But I think he's going to have a really big game in this one. Tayshaun Jackson and Quentin Scott have the ability, when they touch the ball, they can take off and run with it. They're not necessarily, well, I was going to say they're not necessarily the kind of guys to bowl you over, but Tayshaun showed that he can do that against Western when he bowled over into the end zone there. But typically speaking, especially against a linebacking core like Queens has, I think that getting chunk yardage on the ground is not going to be something that you should go in expecting. I think establishing a run game is always going to be important, but that passing attack has got to be there for Laurier. This is one of the best defensive secondaries, period, that Queens has in that back end, with guys like Jared Seaway, Asher Miller-Milan, Keegan Vanek. Like, that's an outstanding and veteran, for the most part, defensive secondary, but you're going to have to get the ball to those playmakers out there. Kenyon Robinson has been playing very well, even as a second-year player. We know Mr. November and Ryan Hughes is going to be open. He's going to have a big game. But I'm going to have to see that passing game come up, despite the great challenge that they have in front of them, because I don't think just relying on the run for Laurier is going to be able to get it done against a Queens team like this.
And Coach, as I kind of set up, I'm curious to get your read on Cal as someone that had to prep for him in his first game in not just OUA football, but in Canadian football. And I forget what the number was, 7 or so years, because of his experience playing high school football, doing prep, and then his time down in the States in doing college football. I'm curious what you saw in that playoff game you had against Laurier and what Cal brought to the table versus the start of the season. And not to throw too much at you on the one question, but when we talk about Laurier establishing the ground game, as we alluded to, so much of it has to do with 44, Justin Pace there in the middle. Your matchup with Queens going back to week 7 saw him still out of the lineup, if memory serves. Like, how does that influence? How can the presence or lack thereof of someone of his caliber completely change your approach to probably not just offensively, but probably everything you do on the team. So I'm curious about the Cal Wither piece, how you saw him at the start of the year, and then the playoff game you just dealt with Laurier. And then on the Queen side of things, the impact that 44 has in terms of how you prep offensively.
Yeah, I think when we played Cal the first game, Coach Galloway protected him really well. It was his first game in a long time. You could see that there was more prescribed throws, like you say, RPOs, play action, things where you could utilize his legs. And in that first game, he played off schedule really well. So he's a great downfield thrower, keeps his eyes downfield as he gets out and makes those off schedule plays. I think what you're alluding to is he looks way more comfortable in the offense now. And it comes down to when you're in 5R, it used to be Ethan Jordan and Ryan Hughes flipping around, right? So you couldn't really set the field up one way or the other if you wanted to defensively. Now, if Ethan is out, if EJ's out, okay, the fifth receiver who they played against us last week was Logan Moore. He's really only a second-year player. And so the question that Coach Galloway, a little bit inside baseball type of question, but how much does Coach Galloway want to be in 2-back versus 5R and put a young receiver like Logan Moore out there? Because while Keon's been a great receiver, he had a big play against Western the week before, he really is a wideout type, whereas EJ is playing in the slot and he's so dangerous there. And so if you go back to being able to establish the run, I think part of the key to victory is can they run the ball effectively, where Justin Pace, his best attribute is, the 6 inches between his ears. He diagnoses run pass better than anybody in the league. And so if you can't just drop back on him, because he also gets in the windows. He does an amazing job of making it difficult for the quarterback. And so that RPO play action game is going to be a big part of what they do. And if Laurier has to throw a ton, well, Queens has Oliver Jackson, who's really come along as a pass rusher, one of the best, I think, in the OUA this year at getting to the quarterback. You could call him a little more of a pass rush specialist. And so if you can force Oliver to play the run, it kind of negates that pass rush ability. But if Queens gets up and Laurier has to throw, that gives, it plays into the Queens Golden Gales hands where now they can make them one-dimensional. And then on the Justin Pace side, he's so good at diagnosing run pass and cleans everything up. They do a great job of keeping him, getting offensive linemen off of him, so preventing getting second level. Eric Johnson is one of the best at that. He's a veteran guy. Their D-line's been unbelievable the past few years. I think if you look at them, they're a little younger on the D-line now, which made it a little bit harder for those linebackers. And so I think the edge goes to a really veteran Laurier offensive line against that Queens defensive line. But again, with Pace, he's such a great player. He can erase a lot in the run game. So again, it comes down to whether he can negate, that run game of Tayshawn or Quinton. And if he can, that's their key to victory.
I just can't get over how cool it was hearing you, of all people, call them the Golden Gales there, Coach. That was awesome. And Tom, you were quick to highlight with this Queens team having to deal with, a physical and nasty, both in the very positive, but sometimes leaning towards too nasty, play of that O-line with Windsor a week ago, and you highlighting that, Eric Johnson, as coach is alluding to, big season though he's had, looking a little banged up. We obviously saw Jacob Baldwin step up majorly for them. Stephen Capay's had a really strong year, as coach mentioned as well. Oliver Jackson's done a great job. That veteran O-line for Laurier against what's starting to look like a bit of a beat-up Queens team. Pace is incredible, but as we all know, and as coach was alluding to, he's that much better when those front players are soaking up the double teams and letting them run free. From what you saw of them coming off of dealing with Windsor, and obviously, and not just because coach is with us, Laurier not getting off unscathed as well in their journey here, going against a very aggressive Guelph team as well. But for Queens, as we saw in that matchup with Windsor, definitely, having to the ice bins were probably run low after that one on the trip back to Kingston.
Well, yeah, there's a reason why I described that game between Queens and Windsor as a high-scoring rock fight. Like that's what it was. It was two teams just going at each other, and I can't remember how many guys from Windsor had to be taken off the field. Obviously, the injury to Wade B. Mumbo near the end of the game as well, and what happened there. But the Queens Gales did a great job of just surviving that and coming out of that. I mean, Eric Johnson had to go out initially after a pretty nasty just end of the play where Tommy Levens just buries him into the ground after the whistle goes here. So he has to get his ankle taped up and then get back into the game. And like I mentioned, Kasari was out into the locker room, came back and was able to finish that game. But in the fourth quarter, as they're driving down and running the ball, I'm right in front of them and I can see Kasari slow to get back up and really doing everything he can to be here. So the health of this squad is what's going to come into play. There is no team out there that's 100% healthy going into the Yates Cup into week 9 or week 10, but it's how you manage that and how you get forward from there. I mean, you look at this offensive line for Laurier, and like Coach mentioned, they are veteran. They are looking really good. I think Cody Blackshaw is one of the most impressive centers that we have in the OUA, and what he's been doing along with Tyler Potvin and obviously Josh Rietfeld in the middle there has been really incredible. Spencer Walsh and Delphin on the other tackles as well. This is a great unit. But when they played in week 3, those defensive ends for Queens, while they didn't get home a whole ton, I think they exposed a lot of some of the issues or some of the newness that offensive line was dealing with. I think Delphin, having been converted from a defensive lineman into an offensive lineman, he showed him pretty quick the quality of D lineman out in the OUA here. Now he's gotten exponentially better and better as things have gone on, but with Capay and with Jackson, the speed that they have on the edge and what they are able to do with that dip to get around the corner and get pressure on Cal, if he doesn't have that quick play that coach is saying, the RPO action or anything else that you normally have with EJ, you have to hold on to that ball for a half second more, and that's just going to leave you more time for that defense to get in front of them.
And as you always talk about, Tom, if you think your guys are open with those Queens secondary players, they ain't open. Coach, I'd be remiss of all folks to have on the show to ask you about, a little something about Queens receivers. I have a little experience in that field. There's a receiving core for Queens that, if you're going through the names, that, your eyes first go to Nathan Falcone, the veteran in the mix with them. He's had a great career with them. Jack Ashby-Jacobs coming back off injury, showing a lot of promise for them this year, despite the injury. Tuioti, obviously just the size and what that gives them. I'm sure every team wants a guy with that type of body and skill set. When you look at this receiving core, you were talking earlier about, the strides that Vreeken has taken this year. And obviously, as we know with Queens, it starts on the ground for them. That receiving room, those names, and it goes deeper than that. Cedric Smith, Logan Walton, Russell Weir, the kind of multifaceted weapon for them. When you look at this receiving core, what do you make of the weapons they have there and how Coach Nesbitt's been using them this year?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, if you go to the roots of the offense, really, Coach Snyder coached with Coach Marshall during that magical Yates Cup run. And while the offense is different, you can see the roots there. And so it really is a two-back style offense, and it all starts with Nathan Falcone, such a veteran player, and somebody who obviously him and Alex Vreeken have a great connection. The one thing I'll say is Jack Ashby-Jones and Logan Walton and Cedric Smith, while they aren't as household names as the Laurier receivers in their own right, Logan Walton especially was a highly recruited athlete, come from the East Coast, someone who made a great play last year in the playoffs, that kind of Hail Mary into the game situation. And so while he's been kind of stifled this year, that's somebody to keep an eye on. I think he had a big game last week. But when you look at it, it's really about those H-backs, whether it's Tuioti or Silverson or Preston, they're out there and they're making plays down the field. So they don't just use them as kind of placeholders like other teams do. They're a part of the pass game, and they are a problem. They present a major run-pass-read problem for teams. And if you take a look at some of their biggest plays, while the offense isn't maybe as explosive as what you've seen on the Laurier side, what they do is they can use the screen game really effectively, whether it's boundary hit screen with the receivers or it's tailback screen. They keep you off balance, and in a game that's going to be really important on possessions. I think Queens' key to victory is grinding it out, getting really big plays out of those receivers in the run game, blocking downfield, and then Nathan Falcone just has a knack for making big plays when it matters the most. And so while this Queens receiving core isn't as heralded as the Laurier team, I think there's a ton of talent there, and it's going to be they're going to be forced to throw, I think, at some point, and it's going to be a big requirement for those guys to step up.
And Tom, we talk about with this Laurier secondary, how they'll give a bit of that cushion and trust the fact that whether it's Cote, whether it's Hastings, Bayfield Wilkins flying out of the box with that incredible sideline to sideline speed that he has, that they know that they'll give up some of those short yardage plays or some of those shorter passes underneath, and that they'll rally to the ball so effectively. How does that play into some of the things that we've been talking about and seeing Queens do effectively? Some of those X screens off the power looks, of course, as Coach is alluding to, that Coach Marshall tree. It all starts with that power run game down the middle. And, Coach Nez himself is a London guy, born and bred within the confines of Mustang football within his system. How does that matchup sort of jive with you in terms of what we have seen from Laurier, and of course, Coach just game planned against that defense, so can speak to that better than in whatever we've been seeing all year, but where they'll give you the opportunity to make a play, but they're certainly not going to give you much more than that, in conjunction with how we've seen Queens play some of those screens off of the run game.
Yeah, honestly, I think that plays well into what I would imagine Queens' game plan is going to be in this one, because while you do have an outstanding defense that the Gales have, the ultimate best defense that you could possibly have is to keep Laurier's offense off the field. And so I don't think that Queens is going to go in there thinking, okay, we're just going to heave the ball and see who can come down with it. I think they are going to go out in this idea of, we're going to take what Laurier gives us. And we've mentioned it before, Laurier gives a little bit of that cushion because those defensive secondary come hard downhill and they hit like linebackers when they make contact. But with that, you get a guy like a Mateo Tutiotti, or you get somebody like Nathan Falcone a little bit of space, they're able to knife upfield and to just churn out more yards. And if they hold the ball, then that limits. I think Queens would be very happy with like a 17-14 final, because they've only given Laurier the ball so many times. I mean, Coach, you saw it in the second half of your game. I think Laurier had the football like a grand total like 4 possessions in the entire second half, because you guys held on to the ball, you were moving the ball, and that was a huge reason why you outscored them 30-10 in that second half.
Yeah, I think if you take a look at this Laurier team, they're uniquely built at the defensive end spots. Mm-hmm. So, Oliver Jackson is what a prototypical defensive end looks like. But if you look at the Laurier team, both of their ends are a little bit larger than what you're used to. And so that might be a matchup to look at. Maybe they get the pass rush from Mateo Lacatano, who had a great year. He's got a great motor. They're all well coached. Coach V does a great job with the defensive line there and a long history of it, but they're bigger. And so where traditionally Toyota might have a great matchup against a defensive end, I don't think that this is the case here. They match up very well, size for size. And so when you take a look at it, that's gives Coach V a lot of options where he can play the run and leverage the run with less guys in the box, which then allows that back end to come downhill and fit the run. Two very physical teams. But it really is a stylistic matchup where you're going to see, okay, what can Coach Nesbitt do in the run game, and how can he? They're one of the best counter teams in the league. So really old school counter. They're bringing fullbacks across. They're doing different things. And so when you have a lighter defensive end, you might get movement there. Whereas I think with this Laurier team, they're bigger, they're heavier, and they are physical. Like our matchup against them was a war, and you could see really physical, matchup there for us. We were able to get things going once we opened it up a little bit, and obviously with Marshall being such a dynamic threat, it caused them a little bit of problems. But I think Alex isn't Freakin's not built in the same way, and so that's a really interesting thing to see is, can they run base offense? And if not, I'm not sure either team is really built to throw 60 times, and so everything extends from the run game. The other thing I'll mention, both offenses in this game, top 4 offenses in the country. Actually, the top 4 offenses in the country were in the OUA. And so when you look at it, while these defenses are heralded, it's actually the offenses that really set the tone for both. And one of the things, whenever you're playing either team, it's the old adage, whenever you play Western, you need to get up to force them to be one-dimensional. I think whichever team can pull away with a 2-score game, it forces the other side to play left-handed, as they say, and force that option in the pass game a little more.
Well, and Coach, when we saw Laurier really take it to Western in the last year's Yates Cup, it was getting up, as you mentioned, making Western a little one-dimensional, but then continuing to throw haymaker. In your first matchup against them this year, while your team's putting together that beautiful comeback in the second half, one of the things that Coach Galloway goes to is he goes with the double tight look, and presumably is just trying to say, look, we need to slow things down a little bit. He's probably trying to give the defense a little bit of a break. And if only because, again, Coach Galloway being someone that's so near and dear to my heart and obviously has done some incredible things in the league, and I just would love to hear you talk about the things that you see from him from a coach's standpoint. As you mentioned, when you get up, you might make the team one-dimensional. What are some of those other elements that Coach Galloway brings in to be able to sometimes just change the pace of a game if need be, and being able to utilize the multitude of weapons he has there, though, as we often look at, it's that explosive, skill-based position, like a skill-heavy position offense, but that when he wants to, and of course, when one of those skill guys is Leomi, who can just, put guys into a body bag. He's so physical. It helps out. But again, thinking about that game earlier in the season against you guys where he goes double tight, tries to slow things down, just talk a little bit about how he's able to just change the nature of the game with personnel and with his play calling.
Yeah, I think credit to him. He's been in the league so long. He does some amazing things. And so Leomi really provides that opportunity to be in a double tight look. But he's also, as you can see, he can block downfield. He can be an explosive player. And so that provides a ton of flexibility. Coach Galloway is also one of the best at first down screen draw. So, a little bit of an insight. I think you get to midfield. He's a screen draw guy on first down, which the last couple of weeks, if you saw their game against Western, Laurier was very effective on the draw on first down. Their first game against Queens, because we played Queens right after they had played them, first down screen draw guy. And so with his experience, we had a game against them, I think 3 years ago, where we ended up with maybe 3 possessions in the second half. And he knows how to play the game. He knows how to make substitutions to shorten the time when he's up. You need veteran coaches to know all those little tricks to be able to give yourself, every little bit of edge. And so he's really come a long way. He does a great job. Worked with him at Team Ontario, and to see how he gets that team going, it's been where you can see like experience really matters. And those guys understand what they're trying to accomplish on offense. And I'll say this, they're probably one of the best blocking receiving groups in the country. And so obviously starts with Leomi and some of those guys, but they all do it as a group. And that matters when it comes to being up 2 scores and having to run the clock out.
Tom, obviously any other questions that you want to ask Coach about this matchup in specific, have at it. And I want Coach's similar take on what I'm going to ask you, because when we get to this part of the season, Tom, given our experience in these high leverage games, and you that much more so than me, and of course at the semifinal and national level with the Vanier Cups that you've been a part of, we often talk about what that experience is like when you know that you're not only one of 2 teams left in your conference, you're one of 8 teams left in the whole country. And so often these games aren't just about whose record was better, who's got the more all-stars, even who has home field advantage. It's all those intangibles that go into being able to win or lose these Yates Cup games. Just take us through, again, from your experiences that you've talked about before, Tom, when it gets down to this point in the season, when you're in those ball clubs, just paint the picture for the folks listening, what it's like when you know that clock is ticking down and there's nothing left on the other side if you're not on the winning side of it.
I mean, yeah, when you get into a playoff scenario, it's that idea. You hear the adage, "Oh, this is like a playoff game. It's like a playoff game." Well, when you're actually in the playoff game, there's a little bit more to it. There's some more nerves. There's a little bit more that means to this game. To me, and what my experience at McMaster, it was the teams that could treat this game like just another regular season game. Like there's nothing else that's really happening. Obviously, you know that it's the Yates Cup and this is whatever, but if you can keep your regular traditions, if you can keep how you practice the same, you got here for a specific reason. It's not the time to say, okay, we're going to completely change up our practice plan, or we're going to change up how we're preparing. You got here to the Yates Cup because of the way you prepare, because of the talent you have, and it's leaning into more of that and just trying to keep this as simple or as regular feeling as you possibly can. Now, there's going to be some more cameras, there's going to be some more flashing lights, that stadium's going to be filled with people, and obviously it's going to mean something. I mean, even talking with some of the Queens players after the Windsor game, talking with Justin Pace and talking with Asher Millen Melanson and saying, when we went to the Yates Cup a few years ago, we were in our first and second year. And so just having that experience was great. Now we're in our fourth and fifth year. Now this is like our last kick at the can, and it means just that much more. And it gives you that much more of an appreciation going into this game. This is always going to be a heightened matchup here when you're going into a Yates Cup, but especially against the Laurier and the Queens squad that even last year in that semifinal game, it was a hell of a game, and Queens really stood in there even with Anthony Leo when he was ripping the ball when Vreeken was out of here. So I think that these are two teams that understand how good each other are, and this is the largest venue that we have in terms of the OUA. It's the Yates Cup, man. It's the oldest trophy in all of North America. When you lift that thing up, it is pure oak. It's heavy, but this is going to mean just that much more, and especially when you have the realization that there's only two teams practicing in all of Ontario right now, and it's Queens and Laurier.
I'm so happy we got to hang out with the Yates Cup earlier this year, Tom. That was awesome. Coach, as Tom set up off the jump, you've been a part of some major Yates Cups and national semifinal Vanier Cup games as well. When you think about, from a player perspective, from a coach perspective, what's it like being in these games? What's the messaging? What's the preparation like? Is it, like Tom said, you just treat it like you do everything else? Is there something a little bit extra in those pregame speeches in preparation, or do you just try and keep everything as normal as possible?
Well, I think motivation is going to be high, clearly, right? So that's never going to be an issue. It's really who can execute at the highest level. One thing we haven't touched on too much tonight, but I think is going to be a key, is the special teams matchup. Mm-hmm. Tayshaun Jackson is one of the most dangerous returners in the country. And so on both sides, you've got two really great special teams coaches at Laurier with, Matt Robichaud and Mike Daly, two guys who do it a ton. And obviously their careers kind of speak for themselves. And then, really a fifth-year kicker in Dawson Hodge. You're talking about a matchup where on the special team side, if you remember that first game, it was really close. It was back and forth, and the Tayshaun took, I think a punt return back. And Queens had a great plan. They kicked it on the ground. They let it jump around, and Tayshaun was able to make something happen. And then on the other side, on the Queens side, you got a few new faces. You got Charlie Taggart, a Griffin, obviously a guy who's been successful, but new to the special teams game and coaching in the OUA. I know he was with the Ticats before that. And a guy who they had, Ian St. Arnaud, last year was incredible, and someone who broke one of my teammates' records, Jimmy Allen, who I thought I thought nobody would ever catch Jimmy Allen's records, but clearly Ian St. Arnaud has, and this year he struggled a little bit. But it really comes down to, when it comes to those possessions being so important, you're looking for a big play, and it doesn't always happen in offense or defense. And so when you're talking about these two teams who have been in a lot of big games under Coach Snyder, they've played in a few Yates Cups, obviously, and come up short. And then Coach Falls with his run last year, and then the success they've had this year. It's two veteran teams that have been here before. It's really who's going to be the one to make the big play, or on the other side, who's going to make the major mistake that gives the other team the advantage. And so in a game so close, I think special teams is going to be an edge that will tip it. And I'd have to say Laurier has the advantage going to the game on that side with one of the most dangerous returners in the entire country in Tayshaun Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to think, Tom. I'll pass it right back to you. It just occurred to me, we start the decade post-COVID off, Queens in back-to-back Yates Cups. The next two Yates Cups are Laurier and two of them winning last year. And now we have these two teams. They've been in every Yates Cup that we've had so far this decade, now finally matching up with one another. We won't talk about the team that they were facing in those other Yates Cups when it wasn't against one another. But there's a beautiful poetry, a symmetry in that. Tom, sort of final thoughts, stones that we have yet to flip over, angles that we've yet to peruse, or questions about the matchup that you want to throw Coach's way here.
Yeah, a couple more things before we end things off here. I love that you brought up the special teams aspect of this, Coach. And while the returners are incredible, I think the kickers are going to be huge in this game as well. And obviously, you look at a guy like Tyler Mullen and what Dawson Hodge has been doing here, but the punting side, I think, is going to be even more important. There was a number of times in the game against Windsor. I believe it was Matt Driver who was punting the ball, and they were all over the place. It felt like the ball was coming off of his foot in a particular way, and now you're giving Windsor a shorter field than they would normally have to deal with, where you know that a guy like Dawson Hodge, he's averaging huge numbers, and I think the game against Guelph in that semifinal game, he had like 5 or 6 punts inside the 20-yard line. And so when you're constantly pinned back like that and you're facing the entire field along with what that Laurier defense presents, that's a huge advantage going into this one. And if you give a Laurier offense a short field because of a pooch punt, that's a huge issue that could rise up very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's unique about Queens, if you take a look at it, they might be one of the few teams where not a ton of defensive starters play on teams. Whereas if you look at the Laurier team, it all starts with 44 Connors and 11 Laomi. Mm-hmm. And going into the prep for the Laurier week, talking to Coach Don Carter, our special teams coach, one of the unique things, kind of give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, they move those guys around. So you can't just say, we're going to double boundary 4. Hey, this is where we're going to get to. They move them around. They make them unpredictable. They motion around. And so those two players really on the cover side are a huge advantage. And then Dawson's been in so many games. Like, I think at this point, you can see exactly where that experience comes in, where I don't think the moment will be too big for him. Mm. And so that really is a matchup. Now, on the flip side with Queens, they've been one of the best special teams units, for the past 2 decades. And there's kind of a built-in understanding that they're going to run wall return. Okay. Since I've been coaching and playing in U Sports, they run wall return more than anybody in the entire league. And it's kind of built in. And so that's where you're going to see maybe some experience might, come through. But at the same time, having an Ian St. Arnaud back there to be able to do some things, that will be a great matchup for them. And people don't love talking about field position, but like you mentioned, starting back up in your 20 in a game where possessions are so important, the number of kicks goes down in the playoffs, as we can imagine, but the importance of those kicks goes way up. And so that's the thing to look at. While you're always hoping for special teams to give you the edge, if I'm coaching at Queens, I'm hoping that field position, the return game helps me out. Unfortunately, I think Laurier's got one of the best special teams units in the country, and they really are a 3-phase team, which is what I mentioned at the beginning. They just have multiple ways to win. And so it'll be really interesting to see that matchup on Saturday.
Yeah, the last question that I kind of have for you here as well, just going back on the offensive side, we talked about how incredible it's been for Cal Wither kind of coming back as that quarterback spot, but on the opposite side with Alex Vreeken, I've had a couple of frustrations, let's say, with Vreeken over in the regular season, because I think he has the capabilities to be one of, if not the best quarterback that we have in the OUA. And yes, sometimes it just seems like little things are off. Sometimes the ball goes into a dirt, or he's forcing a ball when he had something that was a little bit open, either as a check down or anything else. As you've mentioned, he has gotten leaps and bounds better in this season in particular. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen prepping for a guy like Vreeken in terms of how he has grown as a quarterback?
Yeah, I think in the years past, the frustration might have come out of playing injured or just the injury thing's always been a question with him. What you notice this year is he's been so sharp at protecting himself, using his legs when he needs to, but also checking it down to Cesare, taking what the defense gives you, throwing it away, in certain matchups. In our game, one of the things you noticed is he found checkdowns late, and those ended up being drive, continuers, first downs. And so you're seeing the maturation of a fifth-year quarterback where, because of all those games played and because of all those years, he's unflappable. Whereas I think before you could speed him up, you get him off his spot, you're seeing somebody has total control of the offense. And, it's one of those things. This is why 50-year quarterbacks or experienced quarterbacks are so important, because there's going to be no defense that Laurier plays that Vreeken hasn't seen. And also there's going to be a situation where the moment's not going to be too big for him. He's a high-level athlete. He's played, high-level basketball and football his whole career, and to see him mature into the quarterback that everybody, knew he could be, it's been awesome. We had him at Team Ontario kind of as a young quarterback who was just learning the game. To see the maturation that he's had now, he gives the Queens, Golden Gales a chance every time he suits up because of all those intangibles that we talked about, and someone who finds a way when it matters the most to make a play.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tom, I think we've covered all our bases here. We've got the insights of Coach Surya and looking at his his alumni and a club he's very familiar with, Laurier. Coach, I don't know if you're in the business of making picks, and we're certainly not going to twist your arm, but Tom, I think it's time to pick between the gold and purple or the tricolors of those Queens Golden Gales. Where are you going for this installment of the Yates Cup?
When you look at the matchups that we have in all three phases here, and I think that this is going to be, of all the teams that could really play or the scenarios that could happen, I think this is one of the very best that we could have hoped for in terms of two teams that are at the very top echelon of where they are and playing well and as healthy as you can kind of hope for going into this weekend here with all of the intangibles, with all of the everything we just talked about. I'm going with the Laurier Golden Hawks here. They're going to go back-to-back in this one. I think that even with Ethan Jordan potentially being out in this one, I think that receiving core is so deep, even if they are a bit young. I think they do enough to get the win here at home and go back-to-back.
I'm going to go with you on that one, Tom. It's so tempting to take the Queens pick, but I'm never going to feel bad about taking the reigning champs with so much of their returning offense. Cal Wither looking as good as anyone in the country this year. And that defense, like, again, we've talked about this all year where we just take for granted that Harner Dollywall goes out the start of the year, a guy who, in a healthy year is an OUA All-Star. And it's like, yeah, okay. That's cool. Owen gets Paula Galley, hop in there. We're cool. and the special teams piece and everything like that. So would I love to see my guy Inez and Taggart pick up a Yates Cup? Absolutely. And I'll be happy for them, especially us being in the house. But it's hard to go against Laurier in their own house on this one. Coach, again, not going to make you make picks on this, but I suppose any final thoughts with this matchup in general?
Yeah, I didn't come on here to kind of beat around the bush. I'm happy to make a pick. I think
yes.
I think when you look at it, the health is really a big factor in this. And having that bye week, I think there was a stat someone did a long time ago where in the old version, first and second seed used to get a bye. And the Yates Cup champ was always a part of that 1 or 2 seed, except for a few rare teams. And actually, Coach Falls' 4-4 Western Mustangs team was one of those few teams. Mm-hmm. Now with the 7 team playoff structure, only one team gets a bye. And I can't understate how much that bye getting healthy helps. And so, I'm going to tip my hat to Coach Falls, being at home, sleep in your own bed, all those things factor into it. So I think Laurier takes this one and goes out west.
I thought you were going to pull one out of the hat on us there, Coach. I wasn't sure the direction, but I love the pick. Golden Hawks across the board, as Coach said, to go out west. And let's go out west now as well, taking a look at this Hardy Cup, the Battle of Saskatchewan reborn, Regina going to Saskatchewan. Coach, obviously during the OUA season, just trying to game plan and prep for the 10 other teams within your conference, I'm sure leaves you with 3 to 4 hours night's sleep to begin with, let alone you're trying to keep up with what's going on in the other conferences. But if you just were to kind of close your eyes and think about CanWest football, like what are just generally speaking the sort of impressions, like when you think CanWest football, are there any specific themes or ideas we often talk about in contrast to the OUA where, and maybe it comes back to that Greg Marshall influence, London influence on our game that is often a bit run heavy to begin with. Their game typically resembles a bit more of the CFL style, that pro style. But what is sort of your thoughts when you think about not even these two teams in specific, but just the brand of football that they play out in CanWest?
Yeah, I think the theme the last few years in the CanWest has been change, right? So, head coaching changes at 3 different spots in the last 2 years. And so it's not a surprise to see Coach McConkey and Coach Flory kind of pillars of stability for their respective programs here. And then when it comes down to the quarterbacks, as it always is in every game, really interesting where Owen Seaman, I think, took over 3/4 of the way through the year. Highly recruited athlete that, everybody was after in the country. And then Anton Emerud, nobody's quite sure when he's coming back or what's going on. And so they've had a backup play the last couple of weeks. And before Anton went out, they were one of the top offenses in the country. And so I think in that one, Sask will be heavily favored because of the names, Daniel Weeb, Riker Frank, and just the number of, I don't think there's anybody that looks or plays like Seth Hundaby at the linebacker spot. And so I think Regina going into Sask will be a tough matchup for them. But I think as Regina showed last year, you can't count anybody out in the Can West, and anything can happen on any given day. And so when it comes to that style of football, I think really respect all of the individuals out there, but Scott Flory and the way they run Sask football from grassroots all the way up, it is a CFL style, kind of a Tressman roots system, timing passing game, and amazing inside zone runners. So when you look at the matchup, it's a really talented veteran team against one that's a little less seasoned, we could say.
Tom, the Battle of Saskatchewan that we saw earlier in this year was a battle of Amandrew and Peltier. As Coach alluded to, as we've been tracking week in, week out, still unsure whether it's going to be Anson back in the helm for the Huskies. Farrell has shown some incredible things, of course, handing off to Frank and putting balls up for the now Can West MVP in your guy and Daniel Weeb. Certainly let you take a victory lap on calling that one out. Though, of course, like Weeb MVP, it's one of the best we have in the country.
Take,
but so the quarterback battle is different. And also we saw Marshall Erickson look a little beat up for Regina last week as well. So we could have a completely new battle in the quarterback spot. We could have this being, instead of, again, a guy in Erickson, this could be the Christian Katende game for Regina on the ground. How much of that previous battle of Saskatchewan we saw earlier in the year, is it even worth taking stock when we look at the matchup we have in this year's Hardy Cup?
Yeah, it's really a question of who's going to be starting and playing here. I have updates on it. 2 players for Regina. Renzel Arenaza out for the year with a leg surgery. I believe it was his knee. And Marshall Erickson out for the year with an Achilles injury. So not having their star running back in Erickson, not having a guy in Arenaza who is a phenomenal slot receiver for them, does a lot of the things that EJ kind of does, obviously in a different realm, in a different way, but that's a huge loss. 2 huge losses for Regina and the way that they go. Now, Emmett Stedman and certainly Nicholas Sirleaf, what they're doing in the passing game is worth noting, but there was a lot of question marks even last year with Noah Peltier in this quarterback spot. Is he really a championship caliber quarterback? Is he that top tier in the Can West? And I think that's where you've seen a lot of, Peltier in, Owen Sebin in, and I think you've seen both players with their ups and downs as they're going back and forth in this one. I think the way that Owen has been playing, I'm betting to say that he's going to be the starter for them, and certainly going to be relying on Christian Katende to take much more of the load than what was previously he had in this game. I mean, the first matchup that they had, he had 1 carry for 3 yards. That's got to exponentially go up. And he's going to have one of the best games of his life. Now, he's got 3 Canada West all-star offensive linemen out in front of him, so that always helps. But like Coach said, that Saskatchewan defense, for as good as that offense is, that Husky defense with Hundeby, even with Charlie Parks and the rest of that squad, they are a force out there. And it's not just going to be a simple thing of, we're just going to give the ball to Katende and watch him get 100 on the ground.
You add in Goldstone, you add in our guy in Sue Latmore, and obviously that's a win for the OUA whenever we see him having success out there. Again, it's a matchup that it's hard to, especially the fact that, Mosaic is going to be the host site of the Vanier, and whoever wins this is still going to have to go through the OUA champion, and that's going to be obviously a fierce team as we just broke that one down. It's hard to completely count out Regina in this one, the rivalry nature of it, as you mentioned last year, the run that they went on, Tom, and then nearly being able to knock out Laval, possibly to then be in a matchup with Laurier last year. It's hard to count them out, but I still, in last week as well, with that Manitoba team that, sure, Jackson Zaczynski came back, and we know that when he's at his best, he's one of the best we have in Canada, but a Manitoba team that had been kind of up and down throughout the year, and they're barely eking that one out in a double OT matchup. Coach, when you think about some of the players Tom was mentioning, some of the injuries with these 2 clubs, again, looking from a couple conferences, a couple provinces over, just any other kind of key matchups that you're looking for in this one, again, without full knowledge of a few key players, whether they're in or out in this one.
Yeah, I think when you look at a Sask defense, they are super talented on the personnel side, but traditionally have been a cover 3, cover 4 team. And so one of the things you're going to have to do to beat them is be able to throw the ball. And so that's where, again, it comes down to whether, well, Owen Seaman was a highly recruited athlete. He hasn't had enough games necessarily under his belt. And so that is where, if you look at their success last year, their defense really powered them to a championship, and they came so close to being Laval because of that defense. Kind of all-stars everywhere. I'm not sure that this version of the Regina team is as talented as last year's, and they're really going to have to be effective through the air in order to give themselves a chance. Because if you look at that offense, that U of S offense is really quite talented, and the only question mark was the quarterback position, whether Anton's coming back. But Farrell's done a great job, and whenever you have Dan Weeb and Riker Frank, two guys who've done it for so long, you're going to have an advantage. And so it really comes down to that Regina offense being able to be productive, whether Contende can run. I think in their first matchup, they were able to stop Riker to helm the 50 yards off a ton of carries. And so can that Regina team do that again to give themselves a chance? And that's really where I think a veteran U of S team has the edge in multiple areas.
And Tom, for all I know, because this information may just be available, to folks that actually peruse social media. For all I know, Rhett Varva might just take the field back again for Saskatchewan as well. For again, it might just be public information that he might have had something catastrophic that's kept him out to this extent. But as Coach said, this is a very potent offense for them. All of the injuries on Regina's side of the ball, that defense for Sask, and again, a Regina defense that's still really strong. Platt, some of these other guys in that secondary for them, but definitely not as good as that one last year. It's hard not to just look at this as a Huskies win in the making on this day.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that Saskatchewan is doing well, and they're obviously the personnel that they have and everything. But I've said this before earlier, and I think it's worth stating again. What Mason Nias has been doing with the offense in particular has been really incredible. And it's not as if he's just dreamed up this brand new offensive scheme that they're doing here, but he's simplified the game enough that Anton Ammonrood, instead of being the gunslinger that we knew him and he was just going to throw up the ball, see who comes down with it, he hasn't thrown an interception yet all year. He's been so much better with keeping the ball in secure spots. And in that game last year against Regina, they lost that one by 4 points. Anson threw 4 interceptions in that game, and that's a huge reason why Saskatchewan didn't score any points in the second half, because of the turnovers. Now, Jake Farrell, still being a young guy, he's thrown a few himself, but they haven't really been egregious, at least for the most part. There's a one that happened earlier on where it was just like a tip ball off a receiver's hands into a defender's hands. That shows up as an interception, but still smart play calling, simplifying the game, and not even when I had a chance to talk to Coach Nias at East West, it's kind of just limiting the field. You've got a 3-man concept on one side. Just look at the 3-man concept. Don't worry about coming back to the other 2 on the other side. If the 3-man's not there, either take off and run with it or just put it in the dirt. Let's be smart with the football and let's maintain our control over it, because against both of these teams that really excel in that defense, if you give them the opportunity to take the ball away and give their offense another chance, sometimes, especially in these conference championships, a lot of these games are decided by 1 score or less, and one turnover can mean the game for you.
Coach, we're all on the Laurier side of things coming out of Ontario. Are they booking a ticket to Regina? Or are they booking a ticket to Saskatoon?
I think they're booking a ticket to Saskatoon. Sask has to be the heavy favorite in this one. And just with the number of, you've seen all the individual awards they released recently for KOS All-Stars, that is a great team. And then adding, obviously, Mason on the offensive side as the coordinator has settled things down. And I think they are probably heavy favorites going into this one.
Tom, any final thoughts on this matchup?
No, I think that this is a Husky team that is back into form for the first time, really looking as strong as they did when Mason was the quarterback at the helm here, and how well they're operating. I truly hope, just purely as a fan, that Anton comes back into this game. It being his last year, would love to see him really show what he's got in the conference championship. And don't count out Regina. It's not like this is just going to be a cakewalk for Sask, but I think with the injuries that are there, with the question marks that they have at quarterback, I think this is the Huskies' game to lose.
Well, we're all in alignment on that one because I'm certainly going with the Dogs on this one, setting up what would be a Golden Hawk Husky Mitchell Bowl. I always get them confused. That would be the Mitchell, correct? So let's talk about the teams that we think are going to be facing off in the UTEC starting in the AUS. And Coach, similarly, as I asked you to begin with Can West, when you were playing with Queens, AUS football had a little bit more just pizzazz to it across the Canadian landscape. They've obviously gone through some years where some strong teams, some strong individual players, but yet to have that success at the national level, semifinal level, that garners the type of respect whenever the top 10s come out. There's always people that, well, anytime any top 10 come out or top 55, people are always going to be opinionated about it. But people tend to have their thoughts about when AUS teams make their way into those top rankings. Going back to your time with Queens, a little bit closer to that time when St. Mary's in specific, one of the two teams we're seeing match up here with another Huskies team hosting the X-Men out of Halifax in this Loney Bowl. Talk to us a little bit about what AUS football, St. Mary's football maybe in specific, meant a bit more towards when you were playing with the Golden Gales.
Yeah, I think people forget there was a big change where there used to be crossover games. So the AUS would play the RCQ games and crossover conferences. And so it wasn't as big a surprise, I think, when you would play each other as you get to the national semifinal. One of the things I always like to mention is once you get to the national semifinal, it's a brand new season. You don't know the other team. They don't know you. And so it's always a surprise at that level where anything can happen. I know it's been a long time since an AUS team has made it to the final. And part of that is just the travel restrictions. And you know, if you're an East Coast team going anywhere else other than Quebec, there's a big deficit to that, right? But this is a St. Mary's team under Coach Samara, who, if you look, they're historically, they are the best defense in the country right now. They give up less than 10 points a game. And so you can see what their path to victory is. Now, that St. FX team they're going up against is veteran with, you know, Malcolm in the backfield and obviously the quarterback who broke the record this year. And Coach Waterman, again, when we go back to stability, he's been at St. FX for so long and provided that stability required to be a great program. But for, you know, this year, it looks like St. Mary's is the team to beat out on the East Coast. And then it's one of those things where if either of them have to, whoever wins the game playing either Montreal or Laval, that is a difficult matchup for anybody. But especially in a year where the talent is so strong and you have a fifth-year quarterback in Arnaud Desjardins who, you know, if they were to win, has been in all these games and has been a Vanier Cup winner. So difficult matchup, but I think out East, St. Mary's, with that defense and things they're doing, has to be the favorite. Well,
and Tom, this is a matchup. This is the fourth iteration of this matchup in this year when you add in the preseason game that they took that took place also in Antigonish as the first matchup that St. FX took, the matchup in, I think it was the last week of the regular season, the night game on the Friday night game out of Halifax. Again, a score that was slightly higher than that reflected the matchup, but when you actually looked at some dropped opportunities by St. Mary's defensively, it could have actually been worse. So it was a game that was closer than the score, but was arguably almost more lopsided than the score was at the same time. The coach said it perfectly. This defense for St. Mary's has been incredible. Ryan Butler, Callan Edwards have been just stalwart in that defense for them. But a St. FX team that we're seeing coming off of that big win against Bishops, narrowly fighting off the comeback, fending off the comeback that is, and hitting the game-winning field goal, where we saw perhaps as well-rounded an offensive attack from them, but an offensive attack that shouldn't have been a surprise, where you have Fagnon, 26 for 37, the 2 touchdowns, Malcolm Bussey, just shy of 100 yards on the year. As we mentioned, Ben Harrington getting back into his groove with the 8 receptions, Devon Blackwood having a nice game for them. Still no Zachary Hood, don't know what his status is, but a really cool matchup that we have of a team in St. FX that at their best is probably, and the numbers are there to validate this or invalidate it one way or the other, but are probably should be the strongest offense out East, and a defense in St. Mary's that unquestionably is the best. And, you know, despite, you know, unless you want to take in competition, this, that, and the third, just by the numbers is the best we have in Canada this year. So a really cool matchup from that regard.
Yeah, I mean, the only loss that St. Mary's had on the season was to the Santa Fe X-Men earlier on. So certainly you got two teams that are very well matched going into this one. I mean, Silas Fagnon, what a career that he has had. He breaks a record held by Larry Justanis back in the day at Acadia, and what he's been doing at this team. And we mentioned, it's been a very long time since 2007 since the St. Mary's Huskies got back to the Vanier, the last time that an AUS team did. But we've mentioned this a few times. In that 2023 UTEC Bowl between St. FX and Sask, like St. FX was right there for 3 quarters, if not for a fourth quarter that eventually Mason Nias and that Sask Husky team just kind of pulled away. So I think that Silas has a fair bit of experience, not just in Loney Bowls, but in national semifinals as well. And I think going into this one, that's going to help him. But what a defense he's got to go up against here. I mean, in the first game that they play against, he has a decent day throwing, 19 for 38, 232, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Nothing to write home about by any means. But in this last game, 13 for 25, 192, no touchdowns and 2 picks. And that really showcases what the St. Mary's team can do, especially on the legs of one Malik Williams and Liam Legge. When they get the ball and when they're up, leaning on a run game like that and just doing what they have to is really what the recipe for success has been for St. Mary's. I don't think that Justin Shibley is quite good enough as a quarterback to win you the game purely on his arm. But when that defense is operating on all cylinders and you're able to just hand the ball off and control the clock, that's a very difficult matchup for anybody to get over.
100%. And again, a St. Mary's team that has just been able to shut the door on teams all year long. Coach, I don't know how much of a read you have on these two clubs, how much you've been following the AUS, but just any other thoughts or comments with these two teams matched up. Obviously, the year that Fagnon's been able to have and put together has been a historic one. The defense for St. Mary's has been historic. Anything in terms of the matchup that you've been kind of clocking that you want to share as well?
Yeah, I think since Coach Samara's been there, that he's been steadily getting better year after year, and you can see those things. We're very familiar with him in the OUA. But they can run the ball and play defense, and that's usually a great 1-2 punch. The one thing is you can't count out a senior quarterback and a senior running back, two guys who have been at the top of their game now for multiple years. So between Malcolm and Silas, I think it gives them a chance. But I just think with the year that St. Mary's has had and with the way that their team's constructed, I think if you look at the stats, they're first in the conference in mostly every category, offense and defense. But in my experience, when it comes to big games, anything can happen, and some of the greatest upsets have happened in these things. I just think for this year, St. Mary's is so strong. I would be surprised if that wasn't the result.
I'm certainly with you there on that one, Coach. And, as well, not to be forgotten, for St. FX, a young man in Caleb Fogarty, who with Bussy out for last year, ended up leading the AUS in rushing as well. So again, so many weapons, but it's truly a special St. Mary's team that we have this year. Tom, I'm assuming you're in alignment with this, but I know you love some Coach Waterman and his X-Men. Where are you going with this pick to represent the AUS in the UTEC?
Oh, my heart says St. FX, but my head says St. Mary's. I'm going with the Huskies to win this, despite the fact of how badly I want those X-Men to get back into that national semifinal.
Which would mean that Halifax would be the site of the 2025 UTEC Bowl. And though I would love to see a little Husky on Husky action in the Yates Cup from Regina, they're going to have to get through a difficult team coming out of the RSEQ in the first ever, the inaugural Dussault Cup. And Tom, I don't, as we talked about, I don't know if it'll be affixed to this episode because of the length you went, but you just had an incredible conversation with some new friends of ours from Montreal, from the Montreal Carabin fan club, Les Montagnards. Let's at least start with some of the insights that you garnered from the conversation you had going into, again, the inaugural Dussault Cup that'll be coming out of Quebec City when the Carabin take on the Rougeois.
Yeah, I had the incredible opportunity to speak with Tamilia from Les Montagnards and talking to her about what this RSEQ season has looked like and all of the incredible atmosphere that's here. Yes, it's another Montreal versus Laval championship, But with what McGill has been doing and what the rest of that league kind of looks like here, it's a lot of exciting pieces that are adding into this matchup here. But specifically with Jacques Dussault, who this cup is now named after, he's the first francophone football coach to be ever into pro football. And so the idea that he has come out of the Quebec City area, he is truly French, and he is now the name of this great trophy. I think there was a lot of people who are very excited about this. I think a few of the Laval Rouge et Or fans are a little upset that this is not the Constantin Cup, but Coach Glenn is still coaching now. I don't think you can name a trophy after a guy who is still coaching, despite how many times he's won it.
Coach, RSEQ always kind of feels like this sort of hidden conference that, we always just, and partly because the TVA games, it's a little bit harder to watch it. I'm sure obviously as a coach, you're able to get access to the film, but it just feels like this vaunted juggernaut, whoever's going to come out of there. You mentioned Arnaud Desjardins earlier, the veteran quarterback in there, his guy in Olivier Cool. Obviously, when you have Coach Constantin in this defense there, it's a tough task for anyone. And a Montreal team, a young quarterback, Pepe Gonzalez, and a defense that, while not quite at the caliber of that 2023 Vanier Cup one that was setting records left, right, and center, still a number of pieces, whether it's Elijah Cramé, Nicolas Roy. Tom, you're going to have to help me. I'm blanking on the former President's Trophy winners and sitting in the middle for them on defense.
Oh, Harold Missin,
and so many other guys that make that defense so spectacular. When you think RSEQ football, when you think Laval, when you think Montreal, and specifically, again, not back-to-back, but our consecutive Vanier Cup champions, Montreal in 23 and then Laval in 24, like, what the heck, man? Like, how do they keep doing this to us? What is it?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting matchup because they play twice. They always play every year, obviously. Credit to Coach Supernal and Coach Max at McGill for basically giving them a scare last week. But in their first matchup that Montreal won, there were some uncharacteristic mistakes on the Laval side. So there was a special teams turnover that gave Montreal the ball deep in their end. And Arnaud also threw, I think, a pick six that game. And so the traditional Montreal Laval games and the big ones have been pretty low scoring, great defense. But with Pepe having the year that he's had, what a great quarterback to come in there as a young player, as I think as a freshman. And they might have the best receiving core in the country at Montreal. And when you look at a stylistic matchup, it's really interesting. Olivier Cool is likely one of, if not the best option route receiver, and talking to that Laurier staff last year, the freedom they give him to work in or out to really run that pro style offense, to give Arnaud the opportunity to make it right. One of the things about Arnaud that's so unique is he'll check it down 19 times if that's what's required. So the level and the patience that he has to take what they give him, and then when you have two coaches, and Coach Marco and Coach Constantin, who've played each other so often, it's one of those things. It's a little bit unique where they play each other 3 times a year, and you know each other so well that it's going to be a hard-fought, low-scoring game traditionally. But with the quarterback play in these two teams, I think I'm interested to see what it ends up being. I mean, I'm going to tip my hat to Laval because of the veteran quarterback, and it's I think at Laval, which obviously gives that a major advantage. But with Pepe being such an accomplished passer in the year that he's had, it's an interesting stylistic matchup where those receivers, they can, there's so many of them that could go off. Simon LaRose has had a good year, all these different things where I'm really excited to see who comes out of this matchup, because just from what we've seen traditionally, whoever wins this one is likely going to be in the Vanier Cup. No offense to the AUS. And again, it's one of those things just historically you've seen that. So we'll see what it looks like. And selfishly, as an OUA guy, I think the OUA going out west and then beating each other up with a physical Can West team, it does look like it could be an RCQ coming in as the healthier team. So we'll see what it looks like. But I think I got to tip the hat to Laval just with the experience they have and Arnaud being that veteran quarterback.
And Tom, Coach alluded to McGill giving Laval a scare. And obviously, as we saw earlier in the season, giving Montreal that loss that shocked the U Sports landscape. And so much of what made McGill so explosive, so exciting, so fascinating was the rushing ability of La Tendresse Gimbal. And of course, when Jeremy Momo was healthy, that was such a dynamic rushing attack they had. We've obviously seen that Laval, not only with the Desjardins de Cool matchup being so effective, but Vital and Roy in the backfield have been a really good matchup for them. When you look at these matchups early in the year, like Laval's defense has been so stingy. They give up 50-something rushing yards in the game they lose to Montreal. They give up 27 yards on the ground in the game where they're victorious. The passing attack matchup, coach mentioned that receiving core with Pepe, and of course, this is a young quarterback in Pepe in the RCQ landscape, and we'll see how that plays in for him. You know, they had a pretty easy win against Concordia, the first major game for him in his RCQ playoff run now, but those passing attacks are both incredibly talented on both sides. From a rushing standpoint, when you look at the defensive prowess of Laval in shutting down rushing attacks and having shut down this Montreal rushing attack, and then how they're able to get the ball to Vital and get the ball to Roy, the run game, you certainly would imagine swings towards Laval's side pretty handedly.
Yeah, certainly. When you look at what Roy and Vital are doing here, they're certainly give the edge that way, but I don't know. I think Coach Constantine's looking over in the OUA at the Guelph Gryphons here, how they do a little two-quarterback system, what they've been doing with Jeremy Ouellette. I mean, it looks a little bit like they're trying to do a little Marsh McRae action out there. I don't know, Coach. You might be giving Laval a couple ideas, but it looks like Ouellette getting into the run game a little bit more as that kind of running quarterback. He does have a bit of an arm to throw as well. So very similar in that regard, but with the ways that they're committed to being creative in the run game by bringing a quarterback in, or a guy like Roy or another runner like Vital, and how he's able to run two very different styles in that sense. With the Montreal squad, they have a very young offensive line up front, and so I think that affects your ability to run the ball, although they have done a phenomenal job in pass blocking, as Tam from Les Montagnards kind of pointed out to me. 6 sacks on the entire season, and only 2 to Laval, a team that is second in the entirety of U Sports in sacks. So a great pass protecting offensive line, some struggles in the run game for them, which is why I give the edge to Laval on the rush side of things. But with Pepe and what he's been able to do, if you can keep him clean, man, that's a recipe for disaster right there.
And we saw it took Laval, better part of that first quarter to really get things going in terms of their front seven. But again, once they were getting going, and Mionge on that D line, and Cloutier in the linebacking core, and so many more guys, it's such a fierce defense they have there. I'm aligned with Coach. Gonna go with Laval to be taking a trip out to Halifax, and if Tom, to your point, if Laval's stealing a page from Coach Surya's book in the dual quarterbacks, Coach, when you guys were taking on Western, it looked like, at least from the jersey helmet combo, you guys were taking a page out of the Rouge et Or book, because for a second we turned into that game and we're thinking in a second, wait a minute, what is going on here? But you know what? It's a good look to have. It's a good look to have out there, Coach.
Yeah, we call it the color rush game on our side. It's trying to bring some color back. I think for us, it's really important that everybody knows we're trying to get back to some of the things that made special when you were playing there. The helmet, the jersey combos, have something that we can be really proud of. And I do like that black, red look that we played against Western.
Tom, where are you going in the first inaugural, I should say, Dussault Cup?
Well, I agree with all of your points. I am taking Laval, and it's also, since 2021, if I have my math correct, the home team has won every single championship that's here. So home field advantage means so much, especially when you're playing in Quebec City in front of a record-setting 23,000 people for this inaugural Dussault Cup, at least. This is going to be a rockin' stadium, and I think Laval, with the veteran leadership that they have, especially on the offensive side, take the win.
Well, we are all in alignment with our picks. And if we know anything about football, and maybe Tom and I don't, but we certainly have our guest here and Coach Surya, who certainly knows a darn thing about football. We have a UTech Bowl coming out of St. Mary's in Halifax hosting those Laval Rouge et Or, and a Mitchell Bowl out of Saskatoon with the Huskies hosting the Golden Hawks. Coach, first to you, sort of final thoughts on the conference championship weekend we have on our hands coming up this weekend.
Yeah, I think we're at a unique time in football where the coaching and the product is getting so strong. So I would encourage anybody who listens to buy the pass if you can, support the local leagues. The product is great. That's part of the reason I wanted to come on here is to talk about my colleagues and what a great job they're doing and the amazing players we have in this league. And so it's a really exciting weekend of football. All credit to the province of Saskatchewan, where you can see right from the grassroots all the way up. I think they've got 3 championship games this weekend. Super exciting for that group. But if anything, just watch a game, enjoy, get to know your stars and people that hopefully you get to see in the CFL in the future. But if not, there's a bunch of great coaches and athletes that everybody should support, and I'm excited to see a great weekend of football.
Tom, final thoughts on this incredible conference championship weekend we have on our hands?
Yeah, you talk about some of the best football that we have, and while obviously it means that we're coming to a close on the season for U Sports as a whole, we are getting into the very best games that we should see across the entire year. I mean, with the conference championships, with how much that means, and it's always an interesting spot when you look at it because in the OUA, you're fighting for that Yates Cup. You want that so bad, and then you win it, and you realize I still got 2 more games. So it's an interesting spot of where you put a Yates Cup versus a Mitchell, UTech, or a Vanier. But this is always going to mean just so much. And to your point, Coach, I mean, the whole reason Zach started up this podcast was because we appreciate everything that's happening on the field, and the coverage needs to get better. And I just want you to know, and we'll say it to you as well, we appreciate the hell out of what you have done with those Guelph Gryphons. I mean, the 2 of us were ready to flip over tables when we found out you weren't winning the Coach of the Year last year, although Coach Folds, it's not like he's undeserving of that by any means, but what you've done at Guelph has been nothing short of amazing in your 2 years that you've been there, and everything that is happening across the league. Get out there, watch these games in person, folks. If you can't buy that pass, I promise you it's going to be worth it.
And Coach, I'll second Tom's remarks. First of all, so happy to see you at the helm with the Guelph Gryphons. Terrific job this year. Again, we have to have you on where we can deep dive into the year that Guelph had and so much more. So again, from us and everyone tuning in, thank you for the year. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, fellas. I mean, I'm really proud of the program and the guys. Any chance I get to talk about their stories and the transformation they've gone through in the past couple of years. I'm just really proud of them and the effort they put out there. It's you can see it on the field, the passion they have, and hopefully this time next year you'll be talking about us in the Yates Cup.
Well, I thought that this time this year I was going to talk about you guys on a run to a Vanier Cup, but we don't need to talk about that right now. We have 8 teams remaining in U Sports who will be in those national semifinals. We'll be talking about that later on this week right here at the 55.